I feel like I should preface this story with a little disclaimer. I really didn't believe in the paranormal until all of this started happening. To the best of my knowledge, the following stories are accurate and true. At least, I believe that the people involved believe that these facts are real. Take it however you want. I apologize in advance for the incredible length of this story. There are so many details I don't want to leave out. So many crazy things happened. I grew up in a small college town. Summer usually ends and businesses often close until the new semester begins. Many of my family members have and own businesses there. My uncle owns a building located on the main square of this town. Additionally, he owns 2 businesses. Typical college bar and a nightclub that also serves as an event venue for weddings and more. My aunt owns a very nice restaurant on the corner of this block. The 3 businesses are connected and accessible from the 1st and 3rd floors, as well as the large basement used as the kitchen. My uncle, like all the men in my family, is tall and broad. He's definitely not the one to start a fight. In fact, if I remember correctly, he even worked as a security guard for a while when he was younger. Wild child for most of his life, he eventually settled down, opened a business, and made a living there. My aunt and uncle have been in business for many years and have largely managed to maintain a very strong professional reputation. People love them. My uncle likes to joke. My whole family has fun teasing each other. You learn how to develop a thick skin and not be so gullible. So naturally, when I first heard about these cases, I thought he was joking. Rewind about 8 years. Around 2006, I don't remember the first time I heard about bar talk. I remember sitting at the kitchen table at my grandmother's house, a gathering place for my family every time they came to my house. A few weeks ago, my uncle was on his way home from work at the bar and stopped by to see my grandmother. According to her, he was white as a ghost. Fearing that he might have had an accident or that someone had been injured, she urged him to explain what was going on. He said to him, "I will tell you, but you will not believe me." He went on to explain that he was in his office on the square, after work, counting money and calculating salaries. Suddenly, he had the feeling of being watched. He looked up from what he was doing and saw what he described as the man in black. This man was dressed in black from head to toe, black shoes and a black hat. He first noticed his feet, and in reaction, thinking he was about to be robbed, he panicked and bent down to cover the money. When he looked up, the man in black was not there. The bar is locked. He was 100% sure that he was the only one there. There's nothing special about this first story, except that it's the first in a long series of disturbing events. This sounds like many of us have heard before. Please believe me when I say that everyone who met my uncle the next day confirmed that he was telling the truth. He was tense, nervous, upset, and most of all so preoccupied with the fact that his story must have been unbelievable that he didn't focus on the fact that something was incredibly strange. Something strange happened right in front of him. He didn't want to discuss it, and we didn't have much to say after that. I really want to believe this story. I trust my grandmother, and I know she believes it too. We talked about it for a while, and finally let it go. Fall 2006 was my first year in college. I work part-time as a hostess for my aunt when I can. I was busy with school and didn't see my family often, so I asked my parents for anything worthwhile. My dad and I talk on the phone every day as I walk to class. He lived 4 hours away, so he never really bothered with those things. Perhaps a few months after the first incident, he asked me if I had heard about my uncle's new story. I don't know yet, but I'm excited to see what he has to say. The story seemed so ridiculous that he never felt the need to share it with his group. It wasn't until one of them mentioned something to my uncle that something strange happened at the bar while he was taking ice out of the machine. Employees mentioned feeling like they were being watched. He managed to glance over his shoulder and saw what he also believed to be a tall man dressed in black. This surprised him, and he managed to break the lid of the machine. When he turned back, the man was gone. Maybe you can imagine how my uncle felt. He did not tell anyone at work about his incident. The news spread quickly through the ranks, and before long, employees were too scared to open the bar alone and waited outside the front door until someone else showed up with them. The second floor of this building is divided at the top by a long staircase leading up to the entrance. You can continue into the open bar area or go through a large fire door that opens onto a hallway with several spare rooms, a green room and offices. The first room on the left is the makeshift office where my uncle was processing payroll on the first case. If you continue down the hallway, you will come to a door on either side that serves as storage. The room on the right is empty. The furthest room is the green room where reserve groups can prepare. My uncle and a friend were upstairs around noon. The bar is closed. They stopped to chat at the top of the stairs, a few steps from the office entrance. Suddenly, a loud BNG rang out from the direction of the middle room. Another BNG. Suddenly, it got bigger and bigger. They said it felt like things were being thrown against the wall. Naturally, curiosity took over, and they ran to check. No more noise. They opened the door. Nothing. There is not a single piece of furniture in the room. There's no one else to look for. Absolutely nothing, and no explanation. When they returned, confused and a little scared, to be honest, they headed downstairs. Laughter begins. Laugh crazily. In the distance it looked like children, smiling and continuing to walk. My uncle said it looked like two young girls were running around them. They got away with it. What you are doing? What can you do? The news spread to most of the employees. My family knew about it. Other than that, I think they tried their best to keep it a secret. It's too difficult to explain, and certainly too strange to contemplate. Especially if you're the one who has to work there. There's a lot of time to be alone. A whole row of businesses, lots of small storage spaces. I don't want to go up there to visit. Never. One evening my uncle opened the door. It's been a while since anything happened, and I think he just wants to forget everything. The fire door rolled through the hallway, containing the office and additional rooms located on a street, that my uncle then closed with a chain lock to prevent break-ins. This door must have weighed more than 600 pounds. It took at least 6 men the size of my father and uncle to move it off the tracks. The fire door had been moved. OFF against the wall. It was as if someone had knocked him off the path he was clinging to. It's not necessarily difficult. Enough people can break in and break it. Except the lock wasn't broken. There were no signs of forced entry. Nothing. Calls were made and people came to help move him. At this point, frankly, there are too many bad things going on. Eventually, most people knew about the strange events happening in the square. Luck is not enough to stop doing business, but it is enough to make my family worried. In a last-ditch effort to get information, my father and uncle decided to bring in a vehicle from out of town. None of us ever really believed in psychics. None of them really believe in the paranormal. But as you can see at this point, there's not much left to do. They took her in and showed her around the property. She realized that there were definitely spirits lurking. 2 children died at / near the property, of course, and a man. The man, according to the media, is an evil spirit that only seeks to harm humans. We have all seen this movie. We know how this ends. We also know that it's usually a terrible story and means nothing once the movie is over and the hero has saved the world. They accompanied her to the 3rd floor. The 3rd floor opens to the roof of the neighboring restaurant. My father and uncle considered building a beer garden there. And to take it a step further, as if there wasn't enough information to deal with, they learned that a man running the press was killed in an accident using a printing machine. Awesome. Until now, no one knows about this project. It was just the 2 of them spitting. The medium was wandering around the top floor doing his usual work. She told them she was ready to go down. As they go downstairs, she casually mentions that they should definitely reconsider putting people on the roof. When they asked why, she replied, because the spirits here are very evil and will push someone away. WJJT. I'm pretty sure my dad and uncle were starting to understand what kind of insurance claim they could get in this place if they just lit a match and let it burn. They left there, disappointed and confused. There has never been any strange phenomenon at their restaurant, and the nightclub next door has only had one instance of the temperature suddenly changing from hot to freezing cold. And of course, that happens right in front of the entrance to the neighboring bar. This connecting corridor, which I mentioned at the beginning. Things calmed down for more than a year. Nothing more happened, and I guess my uncle had begun to forget about it, or no longer cared. Like many quaint small towns, Halloween is always a fun time to take a haunted tour of the area. Every town loves to tell a spooky story so much that it puts it on the map this time of year. The city reached out to my uncle to be added as one of the stops. He agreed, and for nearly 3 years, people came during Halloween season with virtually no incidents. How convenient that these ghosts decided to hide out on the scariest night of the year. People are starting to agree that maybe it's all just an exaggeration. Everyone's gone. The staff don't mind going alone, although I sometimes go alone if I have to pick up something for an organized event. Around this time, we were now in 4th grade. I was still in school. My family went into town to visit me. My brother is in high school, and we have a good friend who is a photographer in town who takes senior photos. So my parents took my brother to take pictures of his elders. That weekend, my dad and brother went to the bar to visit my uncle. They installed a service elevator in the back to take the wine to the 2nd and 3rd floors. My brother was curious and wanted to take the elevator down. I want to know what's down there. And strangely enough, after all this time, in the town where my dad and his siblings grew up, NOBODUI knew there was an extra floor behind that building. No one knew it was a small variety theater. No one knew there were old dressing rooms and boxes of props and costumes there. And the most amazing thing is that no one knew that this theater had burned down in a huge fire. My father, my uncle, and my brother discovered all these objects by looking through them in the dark. They collected what they could, and after further investigation with the Historical Society, they learned about the fire and decided to donate all of these items to the courthouse where they were holding an exhibition. In addition to this theater, they also learned that an old town journalist was located on the 2nd floor of the bar, where they heard stuff being thrown everywhere. A paranormal TV show, similar to Ghost Hunters, contacted my uncle and asked if they could stop by the bar and film for a night. He welcomes them, but makes it clear that he does not want to stay there with them. Having arranged everything, he locked them in the house and went home in the evening. It wasn't yet midnight when he received a call from the group saying they had had enough and wanted to leave. They never stayed to record anything, and the bar never appeared on the show. This was the last straw. My uncle withdrew from the annual ghost tours and stopped discussing the events. Few years passed without any incidents. Life goes on, and we all forget about it. I guess it would be easier to pretend like nothing ever happened. Until the end of last year, 2013, my dad received a phone call from my uncle. At this time, my brother and I had both graduated from college and moved away. My parents moved out west. Rarely visit this small town, maybe once a year. My uncle is busy renovating his business. The local pharmacy closed, and my family bought the space. My uncle is dividing the basement into apartments and preparing to convert the pharmacy into usable commercial space. Being a small town, he had to hire a good electrician from outside the area to rewire the entire building. The electrician was from a larger town about 2 hours away and was not local. My uncle put it in the basement and went back to the bar where his office was. The electrician is doing his job. Not long after, there was a knock on my uncle's office door from the electrician, who was now as white as a sheet of paper. When asked what happened, the electrician explained that he was repairing the lighting system when the power suddenly went out. Without thinking much about it, he walked towards the bottom of the basement stairs, where the light switch was, turned it back on, and went back to work. The lights went out again. He took the flashlight out of his toolbox, but when he got up to turn it on, he saw someone and quickly tried to hit her. He thought he was about to be attacked. After throwing a punch, he opened his eyes. There he was, and the character he describes is a tall man dressed in black. The electrician quit his job that day and told my uncle to find someone else. This is not a fabrication for my entire family. These are true stories that caused my uncle and aunt a lot of mental stress. This affected the business both positively and negatively. But eventually, something inexplicable happened multiple times and made us all seriously question our beliefs. Me. I can say with certainty that I will never set foot in this building alone again. If my uncle can sell the house, he will. My brother and I, tired of living together in an apartment, decided to hit the road. Being Midwesterners, we decided to head west, and after loading some supplies into my brother's truck, we hit the highway. Our curious and hopeful minds. We stopped several times, always at roadside restaurants, bars, and similar places frequented by other tourists. We wanted to absorb as much of the regional culture as possible, using both the facilities themselves and the people who passed through them. My brother was especially keen to celebrate these cultural exchanges, and often interviewed people we met casually and politely. Offer them a beer, a dessert, or sometimes even a few dollars in exchange for their stories and thoughts. Most agreed, many of them enthusiastically, and only a few rejected the offer outright, in one way or another, in response to my brother's sometimes overly cordial attitude. Always listened from the sidelines, rarely engaging in real dialogue, but offering my own kind gestures and wordless smiles. We only entered a few towns over the course of several hundred miles, not wanting to stay in one place too long. The desire was mainly due to the work relationship we both had at home. The first 3 towns we visited were all small and quiet. Though simple, the community depends on a single industry, which employs most of the able-bodied city residents. These businesses make up the majority of conversations expressed by townspeople. Their lives and blood are tied to them in one way or another. My brother listened with kindness and respect to all who were willing to speak, but we did not linger in these places. I grew quickly, hungry for new and diverse stories. We should have been halfway, but it ended up being the last leg of the trip. We passed through a town not far from the highway, and very similar to other towns in general layout, as well as its aesthetics. We could have gotten away with it because we had accumulated enough knowledge and experience in such places. But we were terribly hungry, and my brother's mood always dropped significantly when he was hungry. Turning off the highway and following the empty, tree-lined road, we made it for a few stops until a sign told us the town ahead was nearby. Before entering, we stopped along the way so my brother could go to the bathroom there and not have to do it in town. We just wanted to grab some food, in a to-go box, if possible, and get back on the road, looking forward to continuing our journey and exploring more interesting places. Once within the city limits, which was about as normal as one would expect in a small, close-knit community, we quickly found a restaurant, and I hurried to take my already worried brother. Put yours inside. We were welcomed, sat down for coffee, and promised that our food would be brought to us as quickly as possible. Sitting in red leather booths, near windows overlooking the main street, on which men and women dressed in somewhat classical outfits sat, stood, or walked, we discussed destinations in the future and recount our favorite places to date. The plan now was to request some kind of to-go box a few minutes after our meal, so we wouldn't seem too rude if we just packed up and left immediately. We thought we could afford a few minutes in the city, give its citizens some opportunities to impress us. I'm sorry, these are my words, I gained an undeserved air of pride after only visiting a handful of seemingly similar cities. When the food arrived, I quickly realized that we would be staying longer than expected. I ordered the country omelette, which promised a large 3-egg omelette stuffed with French fries, sausage, onions, and a wonderful sauce. It comes with 3 buttermilk pancakes and as much apple or orange juice as anyone could ask for. My brother ordered breakfast, which included sausage, bacon, scrambled eggs, toast, and unlimited free juice. When my hot, heavy plate was placed in front of me, all thoughts of hastily and rudely leaving the small town vanished. Glancing at my brother, I saw similar thoughts vanish from his face when he saw the equally sumptuous meal. The food looks amazing and tastes even better. I consider myself a casual breakfast connoisseur, and I can say with absolute certainty that this meal was the best I've ever had and the tastiest thing I've ever eaten. Despite the horrifying and nightmarish experiences that followed, I will always remember the delicious, creamy omelette brimming with meat, sauce, and onions, perfectly fresh and sweet juice. The pancakes were warm and buttery. We finished eating, and without thinking about leaving, right away, we decided to explore the city, hoping to escape the calorie overload and avoid falling into a coma. We still wanted to leave that day. We arrived around noon and thought a brisk walk would stave off any food-related drowsiness. Parking in front of the restaurant, we walked along the main road, greeting everyone as we passed. Many were as cordial as people in any other town, and in a lighter mood my brother conducted his usual interviews with those who wished to talk to us. We received and encountered more or less the same small-town stories, opinions, complaints, and oddities, even though everyone in this particular town seemed to have a talent for speaking in public in a special way. I do not mean to say that the inhabitants of the earlier towns were illiterate, or that they spoke in a crude or stupid manner, but that these people seem to have maintained their education and learning in English regardless. What is their profession? Occasionally they use slang, drawled accents, but all of the things that usually give off a regional dialect, seemed rehearsed, staged for effect or staging. My brother also noticed this and pulled me aside after the 6th interview and said, "It looks like these people are quoting lines." I accept and express my above observations. With our interest now piqued, we continued walking, looking for more people to interview, hoping to discover the reason for this seemingly citywide underrepresentation. Unfortunately, many side roads and alleys have been closed, something to do with a long-awaited construction. Our exploration was largely limited to the main street lined with businesses, and a few lots and spaces where children played or simply strolled. Oddly enough, even the children have an authentic voices and a strangely fluent way of speaking. It's not scary at all, and in the case of kids, sometimes it's even more endearing, but I quickly found myself scared. Everyone was kind, friendly, almost willing to actively comply with my brother's impromptu interviews, and that, for some inexplicable reason, destabilized me. As time passed and our bloated bellies subsided, we found ourselves surrounded by a procession of marchers. Each individual offered a newly remembered, or perhaps newly invented, anecdote for my brother to record in his travel memories book. Never before have we had such a large audience, such positive attention from the people of the city. Back in the car, we thanked everyone for their generosity in conversation, and politely but firmly signaled that we were taking no more answers as we closed the car door. The crowd, now about 20 people, had dispersed. Each person returned to their original position along the main road. Sitting in the car, the radio turned loud enough to leave us in a blanket of sound, but not loud enough to disturb the peace. We scanned the answer. As we looked through the responses, I noticed that my brother was clearly troubled by something, but he didn't say what. His eyes scanned the pages, and after a moment of speechless contemplation, he finally said to me, "You would say we interviewed 20 or 30 people, wouldn't you?" I nodded, clearly remembering how many people surrounded us. almost shouting their life stories at us. Do you remember their profession? I recall out loud the everyday positions: gas station owner, businessman, police chief, florist, doctor, etc. Do you find anything strange about this list? After thinking for a while, I admitted that I couldn't think of anything out of the ordinary. His attention returned to the list again, and this time he turned to a blank page, then began copying information from previous pages onto that page. As he did so, I looked around the car and noticed a few townspeople looking at us, not in a threatening or strange way, but always close by, unashamedly. Okay, let me know if you notice anything wrong with this list. Missing something. I read the list. Store owner Ernest, Sheriff Dorothy, florist Quentin, chef and restaurateur Abigail, waitress Ruthie, worker tailor and clothing retailer 444 for Argyle, gas station owner Lance, doctor and veterinarian. I read the list twice and then handed it back to my brother, shaking my head in confusion. He sighed and pointed at the windshield and said, "There are a few spots missing from this list. And I'm not talking about what we would be used to in a city. I wouldn't expect to find a bartender, vintage record store owner, or vape shop employee here. There's nothing like it. But we interviewed almost every adult in this town, and not one of them had a job that involved death." Looking at my brother's serious expression, not wanting to puncture his rude theory, I gently placed my finger near Lance, the town's doctor and veterinarian. Both positions, by their nature, are associated with death, perhaps predicting I would challenge his theory. My brother smiled, a serious, almost melancholy smile. "Doctor, at least a good doctor, will prevent death. And yet, in a place like this, any serious life-threatening illness is likely to require the insight and cooperation of an out-of-town specialist or surgeon. I bet this particular doctor is no more familiar with death than the florist. What you don't realize is that this town, for some strange reason, has no undertakers or any kind of undertakers, grave diggers or caretakers, and pathologists. Although I suppose in theory the doctor could do the autopsy himself, if he so wished, quite skillful." I tried to think of a suitable rebuttal, an explanation for the absence of such posts, even refuting the idea that we simply haven't encountered yes, but my brother assured me that we had met every working adult in the world, city, and that none of them ever mentioned performing mortuary or grave functions. An air of mystery seemed to surround the car as I processed this discovery, and I found my eyes drawn to the still staring townspeople. My brother also looked at them, and at a glance I saw his eyes filled with worry, even real fear. After a moment, he said, lowering his voice even though the music was playing again, "I think we should leave. I feel like we should definitely leave before dark, but I had to ask them something. I needed it." Agreed with this opinion and helped him collect notes in his file. Buckling our seatbelts, we drove slowly down the street, following a man who had not moved since returning to his position near the general store. Lowering the window, I called the smiling man closer. Leaning back in my chair, I let my brother ask, meanwhile, looking at the other residents of the town, who continued to watch us attentively and motionlessly. Conversation. "Hello, sir. I just have one more question, if you don't mind." "Of course not, son. How can I be helpful?" "Well, I know this sounds strange, but I was wondering if you'd mind taking us to the town cemetery. My brother here is an aspiring artist, and his latest muse seems to be cemeteries and other solemn places." As he spoke, he squeezed my thigh behind the door, signaling me to accept the lie. Smiling, I confirmed the story by saying, "If I choose to depict any part of your city cemetery in my artwork, I will of course do it tastefully, with the greatest respect and reverence for those buried there." For a moment, the man was speechless and looked at me and my brother with confusion. His face showed deep disbelief. Then, suddenly, his face changed, and he took a sharp breath, as if I were coming to a great discovery. Ah yes, death, death. This is something we have forgotten. Thank you, children. In our rush to fit in and perfect everything, we have forgotten to establish this final and bleak status of humanity, death. Well, let me be the first to show it in our city. Stunned by his words, none of us could move, and so we were forced to witness the terrible nightmare of the man's sudden and deliberate destruction. His normally plump and olive skin quickly became saggy and gray. Then, for some unknown reason, it fell off in large piles of flesh, revealing the crimson and rosy muscle underneath. This layer also falls piece by piece, and we got to see the organs, bones, and most internal parts of the human body. When all the flesh and tissue had left, the skeleton, animated by a force beyond nature, raised its arms as if more fully present, then, with the remaining refuse, collapsed onto concrete. The wreckage that had once belonged to a man then underwent a frighteningly rapid period of decomposition, becomes a puddle of semi-liquid slime within seconds. Near the site of supernaturally rapid decomposition, I was subjected to the stench emitted and forced to silence my screams, which began with the skinning, to prevent me from inhaling and tasting the poisonous gas. Breathing heavily, eyes glued to the road ahead, my brother pressed hard on the accelerator, sending the car hurtling down the road toward a blocked intersection, where he probably intended to turn around and go back freeway. As we ran down that street, I watched other townspeople walk on the sidewalk, and then each, horribly, push themselves into similar self-destruction. Some disintegrate more quickly than others. Their bodies turned into crimson clouds, sending chunks of human flesh that smashed into our windows. Big pink rockets leave tracks and marks. Cried so loudly and unrecognizably as my brother continued on his way in silence, eyes glued to the road, unwilling to look left or right at the horror unfolding. We reached the highway safely, unharmed. Our car only had superficial blood stains, but I will never forget. I will forever be haunted by the horrifying moment that came, that last suffocation. Even when everyone in the city had quit smoking, stinking on the sun-dried concrete, I could still hear them chanting, in hoarse voices, "Die, death. We must not forget death." If you're loving these stories so far, could you click the subscribe button below? It's free, and you'll get to enjoy more scary stories from me. I live in a small town of about 1,000 people. Everyone knows everyone, and most of them are very nice people. I don't find this strange, since most small towns are communities. There are 5 businesses in this town: a gas station, a restaurant, 2 bars, and a new butcher shop opening in town this year. Everyone loves the meat there, and it's a great price you can't go wrong with. It was a Friday evening, about 11 p.m., and I saw police lights on the outskirts of town. A terrible accident occurred when 2 power line repairmen were electrocuted. Their charred bodies lay motionless under the power lines. The police were the first to leave because after getting detailed information, they ran away. The ambulance had not yet arrived, as it had to come from another town more than an hour away. Only one man wearing a bloody white apron stood out in the darkness, bending down to look at the bodies, and that's when I realized it was the butcher, Mark. I quietly looked outside, wondering what he was doing. Does he know the boys? Are they friends? Family? All these thoughts ran through my mind. Then I saw him. He took out a hunting knife from his pocket and began cutting large pieces of meat from the charred bodies. I rubbed my eyes because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. He stopped looking around and started hiding pieces of meat near a nearby bush. After a few minutes of cutting most of the flesh out of the body, there wasn't much left but bones. I couldn't look any further because I was so afraid he would see me. He then moves like a creature, but very fast, like a hunchback zombie 28 days later. Very quickly, he passed by me and left. I went home scared, trying to come to terms with what I had seen. I didn't sleep all that night. The next day, I was curious and had to go see if the stones were still hidden under the bushes. When I arrived, I saw yellow crime scene tape wrapped around power lines, and the bodies were gone. I walked to where I saw him hiding the body, and it all disappeared. Only blood remained, and it seemed he was leaving a trail leading to the forest on the outskirts of town. I followed the trail as best I could before it got cold. I have to find out what happened to the meat. Did the butcher turn around and make it look like an animal did this? Did an animal or creature do this? I should have stayed and watched longer. I had to know, so I walked past the parked butcher shop and watched for a few hours. Just saw normal customers coming and going. I decided to go home and take a nap because I couldn't rest after this whole situation. I had a terrible dream. Mark, the butcher, was in it. He cuts up human bodies and makes steaks, burgers, etc. from them. He was in a bloody mess, and he tied me up and said, "Now you know my secret, that you will become human flesh." I woke up in a cold sweat. Thank God it was a dream. But was it a sign? Is everyone in town, including me, a cannibal? Is that why it offers the best prices in the state for red meat? I wonder. I have to get to the bottom of this matter. I took the next day off work because I thought I needed to know what was going on. This all feels like a nightmare, and I still haven't woken up. But I know what I saw and how that night Mark ran like something not of this earth. Like some kind of code in the human body. No matter what, it must be stopped. I went back to the butcher's and saw that it was closed for the week, which was strange. Tried to intervene even though I knew it was wrong, but I knew something was wrong. It was an old warehouse, and in this small town with very little crime, no one had an alarm. I grabbed the ladder at home and climbed onto the roof, looked around and found a possible passage through the air duct. It's a commercial scale system, large enough that I had no problem walking down the aisle. It smelled so much like death that I gagged a few times before I started walking. Then I broke through and fell 15 feet, gasping for air. I don't want to breathe in the meat locker. Saw the horror I had imagined. 2 police officers and a paramedic were hanging upside down, with pools of blood underneath them, their throats slit almost to the spine. They smelled bad, as if they had been there for a while. The bodies were expressionless. Then I heard a door and a strange growling and howling sound. I ran and hid behind a bunch of crates. Fear is taking over my body, because I don't know what will happen. Bursting through the door, Mark acted strange and made animal-like noises as he hobbled quickly toward the bodies. I was worried. If he found me here, I would probably be dead. He began sawing off the bodies limb by limb, throwing only the heads, arms, and legs into a black plastic bag. Then he started tasting raw meat. I almost vomited when he made noises like a gluttonous creature eating leftovers. Then he started grinding the meat in a hamburger grinder, wrapping it up and putting it in the freezer. I didn't know how much longer I could stand it. His eyes were black, and there was blood everywhere. He acted very strangely, and eventually he left the room. I heard other tools grinding, cutting, chopping in the next room. Now is my chance to find a way out. Hell, there's only one way in and out, so I'll have to stay until he leaves without being noticed. It's been a few hours. It's finally quiet. I haven't heard anyone leave. Trembling with fear, I crawled out from behind the crates and made my way to the front door. I crawled as slowly as I could, and I still couldn't hear anything. I slowly pushed the door open, peeking into the dark storefront. The coast seemed clear, so I decided to run towards the front door. As I did so, I noticed out of the corner of my eye a person with pale white skin. He started growling. I ran full speed towards the front door and crashed into it. The glass broke. I was cut everywhere, bleeding and almost unconscious, when I heard something coming towards me from behind. It looked as if it came from hell. I cowered and staggered out to call for help, but it was 2 a.m., and no one was there. started running as fast as I could down the street. Looking back, I saw Mark squirming, hunching over, making horrible noises as he started running towards me. Then I saw a man on the porch waving at me. It looked like he had a gun and pointed it straight at me while yelling not to move. I raised my hand to say something was chasing me, but when I turned to see where Mark was, he was gone. While trying to explain, the guy called the police without taking his eyes off me. The gun still pointed at my chest. Then, out of nowhere, that man was tied up and torn to pieces. It was Mark. I took the opportunity to run away. I got home without looking back, walked to the front door and rushed inside, took a bag full of clothes out of the house, got in my car and left as quickly as possible, without looking back. I left the state, leaving everything behind. It's been 6 months since I left. I scoured the internet for this small town to check on the status of things, and in just 6 months since I left, this small town was completely wiped out. The unsolved disappearance of an entire city. It has been abandoned and is now a restricted area.